I remember like it was yesterday. Back in 2013, me and my older brother were playing Cubeworld in our room and my laptop could barely handle it. And sometimes it even shut down when it got too hot. My god, I hated that thing. But now, after 11 years, I remember these memories fondly and the game as well. Checking Cubeworld out as it released on Steam, I noticed that it changed a lot in comparison to its alpha version, and sadly to say, for the worse. Cubeworld was one of the most anticipated indie games in the early 2010s, but its development and release ultimately became controversial and left many players disappointed. In this video I want to take a deeper look at why Cubeworld failed and what even went wrong. But before we get into that, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. With that said, let's dive into the history of Cubeworld. The development of Cubeworld began in 2011 by a German indie developer named Wolfram von Funk, also known as Woolley, who worked on it with his wife Sarah. The game was first shown to the public in 2012, generating a lot of excitement due to its unique blend of exploration, RPG mechanics and voxel-based graphics similar to Minecraft, but with a more structured progression. However, the development process turned into a long and drawn-out affair. Despite initial promises of frequent updates and an open development process, Woolley became increasingly quiet and communication with the community faded. This lack of transparency created frustration among fans as they felt abandoned or ignored by the developer. In 2013, the game was finally released in alpha form as a paid pre-order or early access game on the official Cubeworld website. At the time, early access games were not as widespread as they are today, so players had high expectations for frequent updates and improvements. However, the alpha version was very bare bones. While it was playable, it lacked significant content that many players had hoped for, and the promised features such as multiplayer, advanced quest systems and explorational mechanics were nowhere to be found. Despite this, the game's early access price was still $20, which felt overpriced for what was essentially a small prototype, and the lack of post-launch updates only worsened the situation. Fans were expecting rapid development with ongoing patches, but there were very few updates after the initial launch. This created a sense of abandonment and contribution to the perception that the game had actually been abandoned by Woolley. Throughout the development, Woolley made a series of unfulfilled promises about the scope and features of the game. For example, Cubeworld was initially marketed as having deep RPG elements, procedural dungeons and complex quest systems, but none of these were fully realized in the final product. He also promised multiplayer features, which were one of the key selling points of the game, but they were delayed indefinitely. And when they did arrive, they were buggy and poorly implemented, which further harmed the experience for players. When Cubeworld was released in its alpha state, it had a procedural world generation system like Minecraft, where players could explore vast, randomly generated worlds filled with enemies and resources, but the game lacked significant depth and variety in content. Many players felt the gameplay became repetitive, as the game's core loop of exploring, fighting enemies, leveling up and crafting didn't have much variety or complexity. And after a few hours of play, many players found themselves hitting a content wall with no major new features or interesting progression systems to keep them engaged. Another key issue with Cubeworld's failure was the lack of communication between Woolley and the fanbase. As the game's release date approached, the hype grew significantly. However, after the initial release, Woolley mostly disappeared from public view, leaving the community to speculate about the game's future. Many fans were left wondering when updates would arrive, only to be met with long silences or vague responses. And in contrast to other indie games that built strong communities and kept players engaged with regular updates, Cubeworld started to feel like it was being left to stagnate, which led to an overall disappointment within the community. And to speak from my own experience, I can say that I felt the same way. I initially checked the alpha launcher every year or so just to see that nothing changed, which left me in disappointment as well. After the game's initial launch, Woolley continued to develop Cubeworld in private. As I said before, updates were few and far between, and the game's development slowed significantly. The few updates that were actually released often felt incomplete, and fans were frustrated that the features promised before the launch were still missing. In 2019, Woolley announced that he was continuing work on Cubeworld and will be releasing it on Steam. He even pushed out a small update, but by that point the game had already lost much of its original player base, and by the time the game received more updates, many players had moved on to other titles, leaving Cubeworld with a much smaller following than it originally had. While Cubeworld sadly remained in development hell, other games that were similar in concept like Minecraft and Terraria continued to thrive and evolve. These games had active development teams, frequent updates and vibrant communities. As these games continued to expand, Cubeworld's lack of content and slow development made it seem outdated and irrelevant by comparison. Additionally, other procedural generated or open world games started to rise in popularity, including games like No Man's Sky, which even despite a disastrous launch, continued to receive massive updates that eventually turned it into a highly acclaimed title. Ultimately, Cubeworld didn't fail in the traditional sense. It did sell a decent number of copies, and there is still a small group of players who appreciate its potential and charm, including myself. However, it failed to live up to the expectations set by its early promises. In summary, Cubeworld failed due to a combination of slow development, missed opportunities and poor communication with the community. The game's potential was high, but the execution didn't live up to the expectations. Many fans were left disappointed and eventually moved on to other games, leaving Cubeworld as a sad reminder of a once promising indie title that didn't quite make it. But the story of Cubeworld is not over yet, as Wooly is still working on it and wants to launch a sort of rebooted version of Cubeworld on an entirely new game engine which is called Cubeworld Omega. Omega is a new iteration of the original Cubeworld and is currently in development. After the disappointing reception of the first version of the game, many fans wondered whether the game could ever recover or evolve into something greater. And surprisingly, in 2019, Wooly announced that he was working on a revamped version of the game called Cubeworld Omega. This version aims to fix the issues that plagued the original release and provide a more polished, expanded and complete experience for players. But it begs the question, what exactly is Cubeworld Omega? It essentially is a reboot or reimagination of the original alpha version. While specific details are still limited, Wooly has provided some insights into what the new version of the game will include. Key features of Cubeworld Omega as announced are refined gameplay and mechanics, which set to offer a more polished and refined version of the gameplay mechanics that were originally introduced in the alpha, improved combat, where the combat system is being overhauled to be more engaging and dynamic, better procedural generation, in which Wooly wants to take the world generation to the next level, a graphics overhaul, which while still retaining the signature voxel art style, it promises to offer enhanced graphics such as improved animations, lighting and particle effects. And most importantly, regular updates and communication. Wooly has acknowledged the mistakes he made with the original Cubeworld, including the lack of communication with the community. With Omega, he has promised a more transparent development process and more frequent updates, giving players a reason to stay invested in the game, which is a key part of rebuilding the trust with the fanbase. While Cubeworld Omega has been in development for a while now, there hasn't been a formal release date announced. Updates about the game have been sporadic, but Wooly is providing occasional progress updates through social media and fans are still excited about the possibility of the game living up to its potential. But it's definitely clear that Wooly is taking a more cautious approach this time, which I personally think is the right way to go. As I said earlier, the original game suffered from several issues and Wooly made ambitious promises that failed to materialize. However, Cubeworld Omega is an opportunity for Wooly to correct the mistakes of the past, and for Omega to succeed, it must do the following things in my opinion. Omega must deliver on promises, as one of the biggest criticisms of the original game was the lack of follow-through on promised features. If Omega is to succeed, it must deliver on the features it promised and keep the community updated with regular progress reports. Also, Omega has to offer content depth and variety. It has to offer a substantial amount of content that can keep players engaged for the long term. The world generation needs to feel fresh and rewarding with varied landscapes, biomes and dungeons. Additionally, the RPG elements should be deeper than the original game, offering real progression systems that players can sink their teeth into. And again, Wooly has to actively stay engaged with the community. It's crucial that Wooly actively engages and listens to players' feedback. Cubeworld's original failure was partially due to the lack of communication. But by building a strong community around Cubeworld Omega, Wooly can ensure the game is well received and continuously improved. In conclusion, I think that Cubeworld Omega offers an opportunity for Wooly to redeem himself and the Cubeworld franchise. The excitement surrounding the project is noticeable, but it still has a long way to go before it can fulfill the promises it made to the community. If the game is able to improve upon the core concepts that made the original Cubeworld appealing while fixing the mistakes of the past, it could potentially find success and carve out a place for itself in the indie gaming world. And I personally wish for that to happen, as Cubeworld is a game that I share fond memories of. It is a game of my childhood, and the thought of the wasted potential saddens me every time that I think about it. And seeing that Cubeworld Omega wants to be a version of the game that focuses on the things that made the original version unique and appealing is something that truly warms my heart and made me have hope for the game again. I really hope that Uli takes his time and does lose his love for the game. And if Uli by any chance is watching this video, I wish you all the best, mate. Take your time, and I'm looking forward to the release of Omega. So, the pressure is on. The failure of the original Cubeworld means that Omega must be more than just a promising concept, and it must deliver. Fans are cautiously optimistic, but they are also cautious of another false start. Whether Cubeworld Omega will be able to overcome the legacy of its predecessor remains to be seen, but it most certainly is a project worth keeping an eye on. Thank you all for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel, as every kind of support means a lot to me and helps me to grow. Also let me know in the comments below what you think about Cubeworld and the upcoming Omega version. With that being said, thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.